Welcome back to Nick Learns Thai. I'm Nick. In this video, I'm going to review the first 2,500 hours I've spent learning the Thai language, and that spans the time period from when I first started about 6 years ago up until 6 months ago. Now, from 6 months ago until now, I've been recording my time much more carefully, and I'll have a more detailed review of that time period coming soon. For this video, I sort of felt like there was something missing when I was planning that review of the last 6 months. And I wanted to go back and try to estimate, really guesstimate, all of the hours I'd spent learning Thai or doing sort of Thai-related activities since I started, so I could have a rough idea of the number of hours. And then I thought, I might as well rank all of the different activities that I've spent and see which ones were the most effective and least effective. So it's about 30 different sort of techniques or methods or ideas that I tried within that period. And in this video, I'm going to break them down and rank them from least to most effective, including the number of hours I spent in each one. Now, bear in mind, this is over a 6-year time period, so a lot of things I had to just give a very kind of rough guesstimate. But it's sort of a best guess, I guess. And in some places, I might make some notes on that as well. So let me just jump into a share here. Okay, so here's that total, 2,526. Seems outrageously high. And when I look at it, I feel like maybe I should have been at a lot higher level by now. From that number of hours spent. But, bear in mind that I didn't really know what I was doing for several years in terms of the activities I was spending time on. And, Thai is quite a hard language, and it's possible that I'm sort of an average or even below average learner. So anyway, this is just my experiences, and I'll just talk you through them. So let's start off with, so I've got them in terms of levels here. So there's 15 different levels and there's 30 different techniques. So some of them I've sort of grouped together by, having a rough effectiveness level the same. Now, also worth keeping in mind that just because they're lower, if they're lower down the list in terms of effectiveness, doesn't mean they're not effective. Just by comparison to the other techniques, they were less effective. Another thing to keep in mind is I've sort of ranked them by effectiveness for me as how I noticed their effectiveness, like in terms of if I kind of noticed how they improved me in different skills. But there could have been some things that were having an effect on my skills, but it wasn't so obvious. So, it's a bit hard to account for those kinds of things. So I'll make some notes throughout as well with that. Okay, let's jump in here at level 15. So the least effective of the ones that I've ranked here. So English movies dubbed in Thai, Thai movies, and then also podcasts. Spent around sort of 19 hours total doing those activities. Mostly these are least effective because they weren't comprehensible. They were sort of too high for my level. Just sort of thought I'd try and watch some of this kind of content, because obviously it'd be great to be able to watch interesting content, and this is the kind of content I would find interesting. The English movies I chose to watch were movies I'd watched several times in English, so I was quite familiar with the content, and I was able to still follow along just fine with what was going on because I watched it before, but I didn't feel like I got really much out of it in terms of the Thai side. Thai movies, similar story. It was just too advanced for me. Very fast, lots of slang, lots of other vocabulary I didn't know. Podcasts could be more effective, I guess, maybe. I guess part of the problem with podcasts is typically when I'm listening to them, I'm trying to do it while I'm doing something else. And that means my focus is kind of divided. And yeah, I just found it less effective, I guess, for that reason. And there wasn't a whole lot of great content there that I could find in terms of podcasts that would work for me, that was both interesting, sort of engaging, but also a good learning opportunity. So put that down in that category. Okay, level 14. A few different ideas here that I tried. So I found a video on Typewriter 101 YouTube, and I had sort of couldn't really understand it, so I was sort of transcribing it. This is when shortly after I'd learnt to touch type in Thai. So I guess I was practicing my typing a bit as well. But yeah, I think it definitely was effective. I think definitely has some benefit there. But in terms of the number of strategies that I used, it was sort of low down the list. Also, with I've got a version of the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book that's in Thai. I did something similar with that, sort of writing out uh, sections. I went all the way up to page 33 and trying to understand them, looking up words, trying to write a translation based on my understanding and getting a Thai friend to check it. Another one I did here, so I've done a class throughout my 6 years, and we have tests throughout, during that class, and then cramming for those tests. I mean, I guess anyone could probably guess that wasn't going to be very effective long term, because I think you forget those words. But part of the problem is that I feel like the words that we're taught within those lessons are not great words. It's hard to practice them. They're not, often not the sorts of words you use every day. So that's part of the problem, but also just the fact that I'm cramming, I'm not learning in a more sustainable manner. So that's kind of my fault, I guess. And then Thai song analysis. I haven't included time spent like listening to Thai songs. I've got a bit of a playlist because I don't think that sort of background listening really adds much. But I did try to sort of break down the lyrics, learn some of the words from the lyrics a bit in some songs. Didn't feel like it was that effective, so that goes into this category. So altogether, this category is about 100 hours spent. Again, do think it was effective, but just lower on the level of lower in the effectiveness level compared to other things I've done. Okay, moving on to level 13. Language exchange conversations. Now, this really should be higher up the list, I think. I feel like I have other conversation type activities like this that are higher up the list. So I'll sort of mention this again when I get to those. I guess it just the reason it's sort of further down the list here is because when I was using it, I sort of got to this kind of B1 level with my speaking, kind of a lower intermediate level, and I was just kind of on a plateau. So I felt like I didn't really make much progress with my speaking while I was doing the language exchange. But something else to keep in mind is if I hadn't done them, I may have actually gone down in terms of my level. So I do think that perhaps it was quite important for maintenance throughout that period, which was kind of the first 6 months of last year. But yeah, I didn't really feel like I'd progressed much in my speaking through doing that. So that's the reason I've got it lower down. But just keep that in mind that, it could be higher up depending on when you sort of do it. Okay, level 12. These are all reading related things. So reading has been something I've really wanted to get better at but I struggled a lot early on with finding material that was engaging enough to make me want to read it, but also easy enough that I could read it. So this was all kind of lots of different things that I tried within that. Altogether, looks like what have we got here? 30, sort of 60 hours or so spent. This was a nice breakthrough for me, actually, this dual language children's book. It had both English and Thai. Again, not at all interesting, like super basic kind of fairy tale type stuff. But I did create a bit of a habit where I would do some English reading each night, and I would do just 1 or 2 pages of this book before I did my English reading. So that was how I kind of motivated myself, kind of like, okay, you can't do your English reading until you've done this. And then the English book, was interesting. So that was part of my motivation on that. I found a sort of graphic novel or a graphic book version, like a cut down version of The Hobbit story, which I'm a big fan of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and I've read The Hobbit several times, seen the movies, etc. So I knew the story very well. And it also had pictures and stuff, so it was easy to follow along with what was going on. And I also read some other comic style books as well. One thing I will say about this kind of comic sort of graphic novel type style is, on the one hand, it's great in that it's got the pictures, so it helps you to understand what's going on. On the other hand, I do find there's a bit of a downside in that because it's got pictures, you've got to sort of jump around about, to find the next bit of text. It's hard to get a bit of a flow going. So you're reading over here, then you're jumping over there, then you're jumping over there. So your eyes kind of have to jump around. There's not much flow there. So, but then I think at the beginning it's good in terms of helping you understand those pictures. So, but I kind of graduated beyond those now. But yeah, level 12, I think they're helpful, and all of these things I think added something. And I guess this stuff I also sort of tried before. The most recent thing within this period that I'm talking about here that I did was coming back and reading the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that I mentioned earlier. Earlier, I'd just kind of been transcribing, writing it out, and try to understand bits and pieces. I got up to page 33. This time I went back and read it from start to finish. There were still heaps of sections I didn't understand. And sometimes there was whole pages where I didn't really understand what was going on. I just kind of persevered and pushed through, finished it off. And yeah, I think I definitely gained some vocabulary from doing that, and developed some fluidity and fluency in reading. But I knew I still had a long way to go, after I'd done that. So, but yeah, I think all interesting ideas that were somewhat effective. Level 11 here. Okay, this is where my in-person class comes in. Relatively low on the list. I hope my teacher doesn't watch this. I do love that class for other reasons. There was, it's a fun atmosphere. Teacher's really good. It's great for asking questions, getting things answered. There's a lot of stuff in there, like teaching grammar things, and even just listening in general. There's a lot of, I guess, comprehensible input that comes from just sitting in the class and listening to the teacher explain, particularly in the later years, later levels, where it's mostly entire explanations, whereas the earlier levels were kind of mostly in English. But yeah, still kind of a little bit further down the list than some of the other things I tried. And then the second thing here is just Anki decks that I built to learn vocabulary that I was learning in class. Okay, level 10, italki lessons. So this is also kind of lesson-based content where you're learning about vocabulary. You might practice a bit of reading, you might do some role playing or something. I do think this is quite effective. I've deliberately put it above the in-person class. In the in-person class, it was typically sort of 8 to 10 people per class. So obviously the time is going to be divided. Whereas with the italki lessons, they're one-on-one, so a lot more kind of time for me, more opportunity to talk, to ask questions, etc., and also tailored to my sort of level as I go. So definitely quite effective, and good fun and interesting. A little bit can add up in terms of expense if you do a lot of it, which I did sort of scale back my lessons partly for that reason. Level 9, Closemaster. So I have a video on my channel where I kind of go through what Closemaster does. I mean, I have a bit of a demo there. I thought it was a really great system, actually. And I even bought a premium membership, but I just got bored with it, I think, and also got taken away with other things, other methods. So I didn't spend as much time in it as I may have otherwise. I think it's a great platform, though, that definitely worth looking into, checking out, and seeing if it fits you. I know there's some fans out there. They've got some great ideas that they've worked into that tool. So I particularly like leveraging AI and sort of technology. And it's relatively affordable as well. So definitely worth checking out. And I definitely thought it was good, but I just didn't spend that much time in it in the end. Okay, talking with random Thai people and friends. This one was like the most difficult to estimate because I, didn't have any records or anything. I just kind of did some rough calculations and came up with this number of 700 hours, which seems massively high. So then I kind of revised and thought, maybe it's actually in the range of 350 to 700. I still don't really know. So this is like on trips to Thailand where I'm, in a restaurant ordering food or talking to random people, talking to friends in Australia, going to Thai restaurants in Australia and ordering food and talking, or just talking to Thai friends or people in the community in Australia. So all that kind of like in between chit chat and talking that I didn't really track or didn't have any way of kind of, having a good idea of how much time I'd spent. And so this is sort of a conservative estimate in terms of its kind of an overestimate, I think, or the upper end of the range. And this was mostly, I guess, practicing things I already knew and geared more towards the simpler stuff. So like, hello, how are you? What did what are you doing this weekend? Or what did you do last weekend? Or, can I order this food or that food, et cetera, et cetera. So seems like a lot, but yeah, more about the basics and less about pushing into those more difficult topics, which is something I'm sort of struggling with at the moment. Okay, we're getting kind of into the business end of this list. Okay, YouTube. So I've put Thai native content, but what I meant there was made by native speakers with native speakers in it, but mostly for learners. So as is the case with all of these techniques, if anyone's interested in hearing more, like, for example, hearing more about the YouTube channels I recommend, please put a comment down below and let me know, and I'll be able to make a video about that. But yeah, around 130 hours spent watching this kind of content. And yeah, so a good chunk of it for learners, like Comprehensible Thai, for example, is in there. And there's one called I Want to Learn Thai, I think, which I really enjoyed. Thought was good, much shorter clips. Also, I did spend a bunch of time watching Backpegger. I think it's pronounced Backpacker. Just a guy that backpacks around the world, a Thai guy, and he does a travel vlog about his experiences. And so I spent a bunch of time in that. That's more native content. So yeah, a bit of a mix there, but relatively effective. And I guess we come back to like, is it comprehensible? Is the main thing there that's going to determine if it's going to be helpful. And I guess the benefit of looking for learner-orientated content is that it's been tailored in terms of vocabulary and also in terms of speed to help the learner. Okay, similar sort of thing here, YouTube. Foreigners speaking Thai. This one could be a bit controversial because, you could argue that the pronunciation is not going to be quite as good as native speakers, so it's not as good to watch it. But one advantage of watching foreigners speaking, and I should say it's videos of people that speak Thai very well. But one advantage there is they think they use a more restricted vocabulary than Thai native speakers, and they just typically speak slower in my experience. So, and maybe there's some other reasons why they're easier to understand than native speakers. So I did watch quite a lot, 26 hours here of foreigners speaking Thai type videos. And I do think there's benefit there, but make sure you pick carefully people who have, seem to have good pronunciation, seem to be pretty fluent themselves. It's going to be better. Okay, level 5. This is all stuff to do with sort of vocabulary and that sort of thing. Got about sort of 35 hours spent here. So we've got Anki deck here. So flashcards, there's a top 4,000 words list, frequency list that's built into Anki, a shared deck you can get a hold of in the shared deck section. I use that quite a lot, quite at the beginning. So this 30 hours is like right from when I first started and definitely did help me to get my early vocabulary going. I did Yeah, I kind of burned out of it eventually. I'm actually back on Anki now, but same list as well, by the way. And in my next video, reviewing the last 6 months, I'll talk more about that. And I think, you know, there's ways to mitigate the boringness of Anki Deck and to help prevent yourself from burning out, which I'll talk more about later. But yeah, it certainly did help in that early time. I also built my own sort of Anki decks for various purposes, but one that I've mentioned here is for tone rules when you're learning to read. So that's something you have to sort of get down. And I thought that was quite effective. And then later on, sort of a few years in, I guess when I started to do more of my own learning, whereas the first few years were kind of I just let the class do all of the teaching. Which turned out to be sort of a less effective method overall, I think. But as I sort of started to get into doing stuff myself, I wanted to get better at reading, and one of the things I needed to do was to really get a good handle on the consonant classes and also the tone rules. So I did find a website that just kind of had those there, and you could sort of drill yourself. So I did that a bunch of times, and that really helped me to get those internalized to help me with my reading. Okay, italki reading practice. One of the classes I did on italki for a good 30 hours was just every Sunday with a particular teacher. She had some sort of children's books. I would just go ahead and read out loud, and then she would just correct me if I got the tone wrong or the pronunciation wrong. It was a little bit funny because I think that she thought that because I was reading it well, in that I was pronouncing it well, I think that maybe she thought I was also comprehending it. And in reality, I was not really comprehending anything because I was completely focused on pronouncing it well. I wasn't even really thinking about the meaning a lot of the time, which, could have been bad, but in reality, it actually turned out quite well for me because it gave me an opportunity just to focus on reading the tone correctly and getting the feedback on that. So that was really great, actually. Okay, next one here is Glossika. I've got this ranked quite high. I've talked about this in other videos, and I've got several videos on my channel talking about my experiences with Glossika and my recommendations with Glossika. One thing that I always mention with Glossika is it really helped me improve my pronunciation to the point that I felt confident enough to practice with native speakers. So before I got onto italki and started doing lessons and practice and stuff, I first used Glossika and did the sort of shadowing or repeating method over and over and over until I sort of was confident enough in my pronunciation that I could start to practice more with native speakers. So that was the biggest thing with Glossika. It also helped me with my typing practice and reading and writing, listening. So the whole bunch of things built in. It is very boring. So I sort of did it in short bursts and when I could get the motivation up. But if you want to hear more about Glossika, I've got other videos on my channel about that. Okay, getting down there now. Okay, coming back to language exchange here. So I did a bunch of language exchange, quite a lot. Again, this number seemed quite high, but I was really into it for a time there last year, first half of last year. A lot of just text chatting. So I used a few different platforms for finding language exchange partners. HelloTalk was the one that emerged. There was another one I used before that. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But basically, I was just chatting with Thai people there. I have accounted for the fact that part of the time I was practicing in English. So this 153 is my guesstimate of how much of that time I spent chatting in Thai. And of course, half of that would have been typing and writing Thai myself, and half would have been sort of reading my language partners' chats. Although in one of the chats that I did, we actually did a sort of cross-chat type arrangement where I would only type in Thai and they would only type in English. So I wasn't practicing reading their chats in that case. But anyway, found this to be quite effective. Obviously the reading and writing here is kind of tailored to more towards chatting, but that's likely to be something I'll use Thai for the most, in daily life, is chatting with friends. And also like social media, I guess it's going to be similar sort of language. So the sort of vocab's kind of tailored more towards, it's kind of the written version of the spoken vocab, I guess, to some degree, or maybe it's like halfway between spoken vocab and written vocab. But yeah, quite fun to chat, and yeah, definitely build up my skills in my touch typing, my reading, my writing, getting more fluid there. So very effective for me, and that's great. Spend a bunch of time in it. Okay, coming to my most effective method now. Level 1, italki conversation practice sessions. So I spent a good 62 hours, 62 and a half hours on that. So that's just finding italki teachers who offer conversation practice sessions. So you're not really any kind of teaching. You can kind of ask questions, or how would you say this, or what does that mean, or what's the difference between this and that? But for the most part, it's about conversation. So talking about all sorts of different topics, and really enjoyable. I just enjoyed doing this a lot. Like I said, I did Glossika first. That kind of got me up to a point where I was sort of confident enough, because before that, I just wasn't very confident in speaking, a little bit scared of speaking with native speakers. So Glossika kind of got me to the edge of that. And then the italki conversation sessions really just accelerated my speaking and brought me up to, I guess, the level that I was at the end of this 2,500 hours that we're talking about here. So yeah, highly recommended, made a lot of difference for me, and that's why it's ranked as the most effective method I've used in my list here. Okay, now I've got a bit of a summary here. Just realized it's got a bit of it. Hopefully that's everything in. Oops. Okay, so here's a summary. I broke down the different methods that I've been through by different categories, and I've put the hours here, and then I've put the level that I achieved, I believe, at the end of this 2,500 hours. So I got speaking at the top there. I haven't broken that down anymore. Maybe I could have done, but just sort of general speaking, about 850 hours spent. Got myself up to sort of a B1 level, so like lower intermediate. So B1, they're all B1 or A2. So B1's like lower intermediate, and A2 is like advanced beginner, roughly. Listening, so comprehensible. This kind of harks back to the comprehensible input ALG people. So I believe they use a figure of 80% to determine if it's comprehensible. So hours listening, where I thought it was about 80% plus comprehensible, about 136. Hours spent where it was sort of semi-comprehensible, like 50 to 80%, 243, so like the bulk. And then listening where it wasn't really comprehensible, like those movies I mentioned, sort of 19 or so. Level achieved from that, sort of A2 to B1 level. So writing, so both writing and reading, I kind of broke it out by chatting and other, just because there is a little bit of a difference there in the sort of vocab and stuff, like I mentioned. So about 76 hours spent in the chatting, bringing up to about a B1 level. Writing other, 153 hours, kind of A2 to B1, a little bit more challenging writing, I guess, in more formal or more long form setting. Reading, chatting, yeah, about 76 hours, so about half, I kind of guesstimated there, around a B1 level. And reading other, 178 hours, and an A2 level. Once again, more difficult vocab, bigger blocks of text, etc. Vocabulary time, so that's mostly using flashcard programs, maybe some other things mixed in there. 173 hours. I do think, and I have thought that my vocab level at the end of this was lower than it should be. I hadn't really spent as much time as I wanted in vocab. Again, going back to my class, like a lot of the time of the class and the homework, I should say that class time don't think I mentioned it includes homework. So I did guesstimate that into the total as well. And a lot of that homework time, cramming for tests, like I said, etc., was vocab related. But I do feel like the vocab selected wasn't ideal in that once I'd learned it, I didn't have that much opportunity to use it. Now, partly that's my fault because, as I've mentioned, I, wasn't that confident in speaking and whatnot. So, maybe I could have practiced it if I'd been doing more of that. But also, like, I just think it could have been better designed to be more kind of everyday language that you would use and have an opportunity to practice. So anyway, that's something I'm working on now. It's 173 hours spent, and I feel like, yeah, kind of an A2 level, maybe with the vocabulary level. And of course, language focused learning. So other stuff we kind of more like studying the language, but not vocab stuff because that's in a separate category. But looking at grammar, looking at translations of different words or how to structure things, etc. I don't think it makes sense to put a level for that. So about 620 hours spent in that. Okay, well, that's pretty much everything I want to cover in this video. Hopefully it's not too long. Thanks very much for sticking with me to the end. Once again, if you want to know anything more about any of the techniques I mentioned, please put a comment below and I'll make a video in the future. Or any other questions, feel free to chuck them in. I am going to be doing another video soon reviewing the last 6 months. So once again, this summary here was the sort of first 2,500 hours spent with the Thai language from when I first started about 6 years ago. And that 2,500 hours ended about 6 months ago. So the last 6 months, I've been using a spreadsheet where I can record my time much more carefully. And I'll sort of be doing that going forward. And I will have a detailed breakdown of that last 6 months, which is about 250 hours worth of learning. So I'll be breaking that down in the next video. So stay tuned for that one. All right. Well, thanks very much for joining me. If you enjoyed the content, please give it a like, give it a subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers. Bye.